Welcome to Scintillations, the podcast where we explore hot takes on the business of branding, consumers, and culture. Each week, we talk to the top minds from businesses shaping tomorrow, cultural thought leaders, and people with an eye out for what's next. Whether you're a marketing professional, entrepreneur, or simply curious about the forces shaping the world of consumer business, we've got you covered. From the latest trends in consumer behavior to the cutting-edge strategies used by the world's top brands, we'll unpack it all, giving you the insights you'll need to stay ahead of the game. So, join us for scintillating conversations that will help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of modern business, including developments in artificial intelligence tools like this voiceover. And now, your host, award-winning brand builder, Erica First.
Willow, good morning. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited to be on the podcast. I love listening.
Oh, awesome. Why don't we go ahead and get started by you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Perfect. So I'm Willow Hill, and I'm the co-founder and chief creative officer of Scout Lab. We're the purpose-driven agency of the year this year in 2023. And we're based in New York, which is super exciting. Just a big milestone for us this year. We focus on building brands that are kind of at that intersection of purpose as it pertains to people on the planet, which for us is all about building strong visual identities and really helping brands scale. And then prior to this, I was at Airbnb for a bit, building and scaling their brand all over the world, and then really helping them understand how do they go into more of the luxury markets. So working with brands like Tesla, and then really understanding the luxury hospitality space as well. So from there, I went over to the London College of Fashion for a stint, as well as the Stanford Graduate School of Business for a bit, really looking into innovation and where things are going with sustainability and with luxury. So I'm really excited to chat today.
So today we're talking about sustainability, luxury, and particularly in the context of Gen Z, because luxury is one world of values, and sustainability is a point contrasting other universe of values. You work a lot into this. What can you tell us about these two universes and how they meet?
So this is maybe my favorite topic to geek out on because I think that there's so many misnomers in this space. So maybe let's start with unraveling Gen Z a little bit. So when we're thinking about Gen Z, so often what you hear is, I think, a lot of wide sweeping statements. Gen Z absolutely is more inclined to buy sustainably, to think sustainably. However, when you actually look at the numbers, they're also the largest driver of fast fashion. So there are a few things that don't quite go hand in hand when we're looking at what are the numbers actually telling us. Now, the majority of Gen Z is also still under what I call the umbrella of their parents' finances. So often when we're thinking about what they're spending on, what we're seeing is not a complete picture of their personal values expressed as they're actually shopping. So they might say, yes, I value sustainability in one case, but then, when their parent is taking them to the mall, dropping them off at H&M, here's, back to school shopping, et cetera, what we're seeing actually expressed may also be partially the values of other generations. So I think that's just really important to remember and something that doesn't get brought up a lot. But about half of Gen Z is still under the age of 18. So just something for us to remember. We can put a pin in that piece. Now, when we look at their habits, they're also consuming more than ever of goods that have already been used, right? So that's where the Depop's come in. That's where the reels really start to take off. And in some cases, those are inclusive of luxury brands. So it's not that luxury has gone away for them per se, but we have to remember from a financial standpoint where they sit within the maturity of their lifespan. So I think we have a lot more to see coming from Gen Z in terms of as their earning potential rises, like I said, they get out from underneath that umbrella of their parents' finances. What is it going to look like? We'll see a much more complete picture, I would say, in the next 5-10 years of what those values look like when they're actually expressed versus a lot of the assumptions. I always joke about this, 5-10 years ago, you would hear again and again in the news that millennials don't want to own homes, right? That wasn't the case. We're seeing that now more than ever. Millennials didn't want to own homes. They couldn't afford them. Exactly. They couldn't afford them, and they weren't quite in that life stage yet. So I think that's something important to bring to this conversation, is just that rationale behind where are they at in their life stage, and then what are those values going to look like when they are fully expressed as that higher earning potential. Now, when we talk about what sustainable values are, that's where things like quality, slow fashion, legacy come into play, right? We're talking about being really driven by kind of content and emotions and that personal connection that you're building with this idea of self-expression around sustainability. So before I dive into the values of luxury and how those kind of connect in, did I answer your question?
Yes. Well, actually, I now have more questions. So before we get into the luxury, let me talk about Gen Z for a second, because I totally agree. And we've discussed it before on the podcast that yes, 78% says that they will buy sustainably, but then Shane is set to outgrow Zara and H&M combined in the next few years. And obviously Gen Z is a stronghold in that.
Exactly.
So here's a provocative question.
Yeah.
I've decided. So when I was younger, when I was 18, 17, I was very idealistic, right? I probably belonged to a lot more socially conscious groups than I do now. I would say I'm probably more responsible now about it than I was back then, but I was a lot more vocal about what's right, what's wrong, which I think if we look at history is common for people of that age. Any incoming generation is going to be louder. So do you think that the sustainability claims are going to get stronger or get weaker as they move into the inevitabilities of life?
They're only going to get stronger. Absolutely. And we're seeing this across the board. So, and I don't think that's a problem either. I think that the behaviors will slowly start to match up with that voice that you're speaking to. And we're already starting to see that come through in major legislation, specifically in Europe, that the rest of the world is now looking at as kind of setting the tone for where we need to go. And that's where you really see movement from brands at the end of the day, right? They're on one hand looking to consumers saying, okay, do they really want this? What is the behavior? What is going to shift, or flip this next generation into our orbit? And at the same time, looking to government policy and saying, what do we actually need to act on in order to maintain our business?
Agree. And obviously, if you don't have to, most companies won't. So until there's a clear mandate from above, or at least some, let's say, tax benefit involved in it, it's very difficult to have a corporation make its life more difficult.
Well, Erica, absolutely.
It's an unfortunate truth. They're like, if no one's going to complain about it, we're just going to keep going on the way we're going, right? If we think it's going to touch sales, then we'll start doing what we have to.
Yes.
But brands, that expensive brands in, $1,000, $1,500 bags, actively chasing Gen Z targets. Is this smart or not smart?
I think it's smart. I think you, as a brand, you have to pay attention to what the next generation wants and what they're doing. This isn't quite at that price point. Coach, I don't know if we wouldn't quite consider it full luxury, but certainly lifestyle and pushing towards luxury. They're actually a really interesting example of a company that has created an entire new sub-brand and arm just to speak to Gen Z. The aesthetic is slightly different. They're looking at how they can reposition a lot of their materials, buyback. They're really leaning into it. And you'll see, again, going back to the conglomerates like LVMH, dropping lines that they think are a little bit more aesthetically aligned to Gen Z at the same time. So you do see brands starting to play with this. And I think it's only going to continue. It's never ever been a good idea for a brand to completely ignore what the next generation wants, because eventually those will become your core customers. And the lead time is usually only 5 to 10 years, right? So we're talking about that being just enough time to really build up an audience.
Okay, so the advertising of today is for the purchaser of 5 years from now.
Yeah, you have to start to build the community. You have to start to build in that strategy and work towards that now. Because if you want to just flip it on when the time is ready, they won't be there.
Yeah.
Right? Because you weren't paying attention to them along the way. And you see that with brands now that maybe weren't paying attention to millennials previously, because similarly, they're never going to want to own a home. The same kind of perspective when 5 years later, we're talking about the maturity of their financial situation actually matching the price point of the products that these more luxury companies are selling.
Okay, so now let's get into your next chapter. You were going to talk about luxury.
Yes. So luxury and sustainability actually have quite a few overlapping values, I think, that are very important to consider, but often overlooked. So when we're thinking about the values of luxury, we're often talking about really high quality materials. We're talking about craftsmanship. We're talking about discretion, right? The rise of quiet luxury. That matches up perfectly when we're thinking about slow fashion, right? When we're thinking about things that aren't quite as trend driven, or natural materials being made by brands like Loro Piana, or even legacy. So legacy and heritage are very much in what I would call like the luxury bucket. So when we're thinking about, these really classic brands, Patek Philippe, right? You don't own a Patek Philippe, you look after it for a generation. These are values that are really aligned with thinking about keeping something intact and using it over and over again, which is, at the end of the day, a more sustainable perspective. But you also have to understand that we're talking about a very ego-driven purchase, which in itself doesn't always align with a sustainable purchase. Right. Now, that is where I think this conversation gets really interesting, because I believe that sustainable brands today, in order to win, actually need to put the me before the we. So what do I mean by that? You have to consider design, right? If something doesn't fit or doesn't look good, it doesn't matter how sustainable it is. I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to wear it. It's not going to happen. So unless brands are really thinking about the customer and showing up not only as sustainable, but also just as a better option, they're not going to win. And we've seen a lot of brands in the past really hanging their hat just on the sustainability piece. And I think as, again, the legislation starts to change, this becomes more important. The conversation continues to heat up, no pun intended. That will be the center of the conversation. So you're going to need more than just sustainability in order to win as essentially an offering with what you do, but sustainability will be key for any brand in the future. That's absolutely what I believe.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of younger brands come to me with their brand positioning, and it was like 100% circular, totally recycled, this, that, and the one was towels, one was bathing suits. And I was like, okay, but does it look good on? Like, do I want to wear it or no? Is it, you have to have
how is the fit? Yeah.
There's a hierarchy of decisions. And while you can't not have anything about sustainability, you are a product first and foremost. So you have to have like a little ladder of messaging with where things get brought in at the appropriate time.
Absolutely. What do you lead with? Right? Because at the end of the day, someone is not going to make a decision solely on sustainability. Unfortunately, that would be amazing if that was the case. But we are still human and we're looking to solve for a specific problem. And within the fashion category, I always say that problem is belonging. First and foremost, I need to feel like I actually belong in these jeans and like they fit.
Right.
But secondarily, they need to fit my lifestyle. They need to fit my vision of myself.
So I agree that some of the values are the same. Particularly, let's take Loro Piana because it's an advanced example. Loro Piana is not expensive. It's insanely expensive. So it's not luxury, it's for the very select few. So even if my values align with that, €1,000 for a t-shirt is a lot, and we also have sort of a TikTok or Instagram culture where you need newness, right? Unless your whole character is that you wear the exact same Laura Piano shirt every single day,
Right.
which is a thing.
Yeah.
Could be. It's only sustainable if you buy like 5 pieces and use those, but that's not really what's encouraged. It's encouraged to buy the piece and then buy lots more of them. So how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of what you're referring to is more of this kind of slow fashion, right? When we're looking through the lens of these really, what are we calling them, ultra luxury brands, one of the advantages is that kind of slower fashion. So we're not necessarily talking about something that's trend driven. So it's less likely to be in one day and out the next. I know this idea of quiet luxury is kind of, it's having a moment, we'll say.
Yeah.
But just because that price point of the Loro Piano is not accessible, it doesn't mean that it's not having a trickle down effect to the way that people are thinking about their wardrobes or wearing, maybe the Officine Generale that they're going to buy instead, or really thinking about having maybe fewer pieces in their closet that will last longer and that are more high quality. Things like that innately are helping to combat the fundamental values of fast fashion. So whether or not, brands are still going to want you to continue to buy, the fact that a lot of them also will repair is another thing to consider. I know that that's really, really key with a lot of luxury brands. Watches, I think, are a really great example of this, right? You go in and you repair them. You don't get rid of them and just get a new one, or you pass them down to someone in your family. So those are a little bit more of those kind of luxury and quality values that are still very much aligned with that idea of slow fashion.
If you're interested in luxury, but you can't afford it,
Yes.
then what? Let's say you want to be slow fashion or you want to be that, but as you said, right now you're in a financial difficulty and the outlooks for the future are not fantastic. What
do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? Because I like to talk about like the shifts in culture that either need to happen, going to happen. And if you have this target that's very passionate about sustainability, but again, actions don't align with words, maybe for necessity, maybe just because sometimes we're able to create 2 compartments for what I say and what I do. How does this evolve in the future? Like which brands should be afraid and which brands should be very excited?
Oh, I love that question. So one behavior that I think is one to pay attention to that isn't going anywhere is the secondhand market. I actually think that we're just seeing the beginning of what the secondhand market has to offer and the innovation around what it's going to create. So going back to Gen Z, that massive cohort that is deep in this Depop world looking for their next, style, trend, whatever, but through something that's already used or secondhand, are very likely, as they mature and want to, potentially participate in a more luxury market, to buy secondhand because it's already a behavior that is a norm to them.
Yeah.
So shifting from that, and maybe buying one piece from the Real or from Rebag is definitely something that I think we'll start to see more and more of, that same cohort mature into a secondhand market that is more affordable price points. It's also important to remember that with a lot of luxury goods, regardless of someone's income, often what we'll see as a behavior is people saving up for these specific items, but only buying them very rarely in a specialty capacity. And this is something that you see, I think that it's just an interesting behavior kind of across everything, which is is there a big life moment where I want to treat myself? Right. So now where luxury, I think, used to sit, where it was really just with a kind of like we mentioned, that the ultra wealthy, we're seeing a rising middle class, specifically in China as an example, where more and more of the sales for luxury goods are coming from this rising middle class and these high potential earners starting to earn even more. So even at that kind of 100K income mark, where we're not quite talking about Gen Z yet, we're maybe more talking about millennials in that case, those are becoming the biggest target for these brands because they want to capture, there's more of them, and they want to capture them at the moment where they are looking for, that gift or something special or that kind of treat yourself moment, if you will.
Yeah, I know the majority of luxury brands are very focused on Asia, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, because that's where the growth is coming from.
Absolutely.
So, and the second hand, we're going to totally agree with you. I actually have been seeing more and more frequently on designer brands that they have their own section of bring it back to us, or like vintage thing, like Gucci opened their own sort of archive piece. And I remember like back in 2009, 2010, outlets, like the luxury brands wanted to faint every time they heard the word outlet until they saw what an enormous business channel it was. And then they opened up little outlets everywhere and started creating lines exclusively for the outlets. And I imagine we'll be seeing the same with the circular pieces, that if they don't want their business going to a Depop or going in Europe, we have Vinted, they're going to bring it in-house because they're losing sales that way.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I don't know if you saw this a few years back, maybe 2018, there was a huge backlash for Burberry that after they burned, I want to say $50 million worth of product just to make sure that it didn't make it out onto the market. So the backlash from that, from customers and from the public, was so massive that they had to really recourse correct and think about, okay, the values have shifted. It's not just about exclusivity anymore. We actually have to really think about sustainability also, and waste, and the way that we're showing up. So we've seen them take big strides since that, what I would consider a PR nightmare, of them having to say, okay, how are we going to actually fix this problem in a way that's more sustainable?
Did you do a Succession? And there's a very funny episode where this person who's a bit of a social climber comes to the birthday party of Logan Roy with a giant Burberry bag, and she gets made fun of for having a ludicrously capacious bag at a social event.
I love that. Well, that's the value of discretion that we talk about, right? That's making sure that things aren't too loud, which is interesting. And I think that's one thing that we've actually seen with Gen Z as well. Gen Z's at this stage is not necessarily chasing labels in the same way that a lot of generations before were. And there's, a lot of factors there, but one of them being they're looking for what looks good on them, right? They're really focused on like, what is the fit? What is the style? They're a little less brand loyal than folks in the past. And I think that's something, again, another reckoning that brands are going to need to start to think about.
Yeah. And I have seen in that generation a lot less chasing that version of richness, which now we know is not equated to wealth, right? Because that's sort of the low level entry product. And now to have something that's lathered in logos is kind of a no-no, which is what's giving rise to the whole stealth wealth and trends like that. Like Margiela is perfect, right? It has just tiny little seams, but immediately that it's a Margiela. So it gets that like double cool points because it's recognizable. But
if you know, you know.
Right,
exactly.
And that's kind of the whole thing that's going on right now, especially because of TikTok and and Instagram and the whole discovery world, right? That now everybody has access to everything and we can all know all the things. Who are the people that know which brand that not labeled black t-shirt is? Creates a different kind of status, so it's not, I can afford this, but almost like, you don't know who my black t-shirt's from, like, okay.
Yeah, well, and I think that the market of fakes has also been a huge driver for that, right? Where all of a sudden, the more logos you see, the more red flags are going off that maybe something isn't authentic. So the question of authenticity comes into play, which, again, going back to this idea of quiet luxury, makes things a lot more, it gives it a lot more of a draw, but it also makes it more accessible. I think the exciting thing is that we're starting to see a lot more of that accessible luxury come into play that is sustainable. We're starting to see a lot of these brands pop up.
Yeah, there's a lot more investing in that mid-tier of $300 dresses instead of $2,000 dresses. So it's still luxury, but not.
Yeah, exactly. Or if something, I mean, it may even be a bit of a lower price point and it's secondhand, but it's high quality and it's minimal enough to where you can wear it 5 different ways over 5 different seasons and have it for years. And that in itself is maybe the most sustainable option of all.
So Willow, where can people find out more about you, your agency, and how they can collaborate?
Yeah, great. So our website is a great place to go, scoutlab.com. I'm also, can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's an easy place to find me, or Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. This was so fun. Thanks for having me.